Awesome. Welcome everybody. I'm Zachary Bowman, the manager of education and visitor experience here at the Dorsky Museum, where we are so privileged to be hosting the incredible exhibition, Somewhere in Advance of Nowhere, Freedom Dreams and Contemporary Art, curated by today's very special guest, Nico wheadon. While acknowledging this privilege, the museum must also, with gratitude and humility, acknowledge that the land on which we are located at the SUNY New Paltz campus is the ancestral homeland of the Munsee, Lenape, and Esopus peoples who are indigenous to this region. We pay honor and respect to their ancestors past and present, and we are committed to building a more equitable future for all. Nico wheadon is an independent art advisor, curator, educator, and writer based in New Haven, Connecticut. She is founder and principal of Building Fund LLC, an innovation platform for BIPOC artists, entrepreneurs, and neighbors. An advocate for BIPOC and women artists in all endeavors, she uses her myriad platforms to expand the canon of contemporary art whilst cultivating an engaged community of practice. Nico is an avid writer with multiple contributions to renowned publications such as the Brooklyn Rail. Her first book, which I have here, Museum Metamorphosis, Cultivating Change Through Cultural Citizenship, was released this year through Rowman and Littlefield Publishing Group. So without further ado, please welcome Nico wheadon, and thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Zach. Thank you so much. Can everybody hear me? Just some sign of life. Yep. Okay, great. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here. I wish this could be, us together in person. This is a nice, intimate group, but, we'll deal with what we got. The internet is going to work with us today. Yeah, so I just wanted to start by thanking the Dorsky team. Anna, I see you on here. Thank you so much for inviting me to help build this space along with you and your team. I'm just really, really appreciative of everything and all the steps in the process that led to the space actually being created. Thank you to everyone on the Zoom for being here. I know that there's a kind of habit of taking your video off, but if you want to put it on, it'd be cool. I like to see your faces and know who I'm speaking with. Also, I'm an educator, so my presentation style is going to be pretty informal. I invite questions throughout, either in the chat, or if you need to raise your hand or just jump in, please do. I'm actually trying to get through my presentation as quickly as possible because I want to hear from you. And we're fortunate enough to have one, perhaps two artists from the exhibition joining us. And so I think, hearing from them directly would actually just be the most beneficial use of this time together. Yeah, and thank you to the 17 artists and 2 artist collectives that helped to really build this space. Before connecting with them, it was just kind of, a bit of a project that's been lingering in my mind and in conversations for a while, but it really took, those early studio visits and working directly with the artists in this show to actually create a space of freedom dreaming, that's kind of beyond what I, as one person with my own limited imagination, was able to conceive. So those are all my thank yous. Bit of a disclaimer. Hi, Amy. I have a husband, a dog, and a small child right in this room over my right shoulder. So if at any point things get loud, I'm gonna mute myself and we're gonna figure it out and I'll be right back. Yeah, okay, so I'm dealing with an interesting technological setup here. So tell me, do you see me again? Yeah, okay, I know that's weird. So I just wanna, start by kind of telling you who I am, giving you a little bit of background on the exhibition, and then we're gonna, move through kind of some thematic sections of how the exhibition is conceived. I'm really only important here just because, in some ways I'm part of the frame that is kind of pulling all these works together. And so I don't assume that you all know me. So I'm just gonna kind of tell you some things that you might not be able to find on the Google. I'm a Black woman. I am a queer woman. I'm also an artist. That's how I got my start. So when I talk about celebrating and honoring artists as, people that are really bold, brave thinkers that oftentimes are kind of left out of spaces where decisions are being made or considered, as creative thinkers, as radical thinkers, but not necessarily as people creating actual solutions to some of these questions that art raises. My background is in really actually centering the voice of artists in those conversations. Yeah, and I've lived a lot of places, almost maybe to my detriment. I'm 38 and I've basically moved every 2 or 3 years for my entire life. And I think that's important because although most of the artists in this exhibition, are from America, I think I'm looking at kind of thinking about these issues from a global perspective, and also thinking about what it means to have folks that are representing diasporic communities, and really expanding conversations beyond kind of, geographic notions of home. Okay, so why freedom dreams? It's funny, one of the artists that actually didn't end up being in the show, but that I had a great studio visit with, kind of thinking about where the show might head, was asking, why freedom? Like, how is this different than any other of the like gajillion conversations going on right now about freedom and liberation? And, my response was that I don't know that it's different. I don't need it to be different, but I think just honoring the fact that the pursuit of liberation, the pursuit of freedom is a process. It's an ongoing practice. It's individual, it's collective, and it's something that, we can point to at any moment in time as something that's constantly evolving. And so really just wanting to be, again, a part of that conversation, but really centering the voice of artists in how we're kind of thinking about what it might mean to be free in this moment, where if we look around, despite being in a democracy, I think there's plenty of evidence that people are living their daily lives, with assaults to their civil liberties. And so thinking about this book is a really good kind of entry point. It's a really loose entry point. It's not, overly didactic and referencing, all of the different kind of thinkers and movement leaders that Robin D.G. Kelley, cites in his book, but it really is going back to this kind of central prompt, which is in the introduction, which says, without new visions, we don't know what to build, only what to knock down. We not only end up confused, rudderless, and cynical, but we forget that making a revolution is not a series of clever maneuvers and tactics, but a process that can and must transform us. Maybe just sit with that for a second. Because every time I read it, I hear and see something different. I think going back to process, right? And that I think what is unique about so many of the works in this exhibition is that they don't present as answers, solutions, polished, final products. That's not to say that they're not, but I don't think that that's the intent with a lot of how these works are made. I think they celebrate process. They kind of show what's behind the veil. There's edges of work that can be seen. It's not all tidy and tucked away, in, kind of museum gallery style framing and presentation. I think that's really important to note. And I think, kind of lastly, I think talking about freedom as something that's like an ongoing project for myself, right? I think that if I look at, my writing, my consulting, my teaching, and now curating with this exhibition, freedom has been this quest that has driven so much of my work, and freedom for my communities, right? So I'm thinking about Black people, I'm thinking about queer people, I'm thinking about anybody in this country that struggles on a daily basis to assert independence and to feel free even in their own bodies and their own homes. And so, I think that, it kind of starts from this concentric circle and moves outward. And I think hopefully you'll see that and sense that as we move through some of the images here. And I think the last thing to point out is, kind of pointing to authors, right? Thinking about authors as artists, as other bold thinkers, and really being grateful that Robin Kelley did this in his book as well, right? That he's not just talking about politicians who are moving these kind of social and cultural movements forward. He's looking at feminist thinkers and writers, artists, visual artists, musical artists. And, I think that this exhibition takes on a similar lens, right? It puts those people at the center and celebrates that work, not as overly conceptual, but as part of this process that leads us to actually getting free. So I know I said I was gonna not be verbose, but I'm just excited. Okay, so there's one more quote here that I wanna read, this also from the introduction. Too often, our standards for elevating social movements pivot around whether or not they succeeded in realizing their visions, rather than on the merits or power of the visions themselves. By such a measure, virtually every radical movement failed because the basic power relations they sought to change remained pretty much intact. And yet it is precisely these alternative visions and dreams that inspire new generations to struggle for freedom, for change. So, for me, at least, this points to why I'm so excited for this exhibition to live at the Dorsky, and thinking about teaching museums and the opportunity that exhibitions pose, not to make a statement necessarily, but to start a conversation, and thinking about all the conversations that are present in an exhibition, right? The conversation between works, between works and space, the conversation between artists, in a general sense in terms of their practice and what they're interested in, but also the conversation, that arrives when people bring their own kind of understanding of history into space and into dialogue with each other. And so again, going back to the sense of like process being the most important thing here, and that change is something that happens over time. And thinking of the works in this exhibition as, kind of vignettes or snapshots into what is clearly a broader conversation. Hold on. Here is a beautiful install shot, courtesy of the Dorsky. I think maybe Bob took this photo, I don't know. Yep. I'm really excited to see the show on Sunday. It's such a challenge curating, in COVID, while also pregnant. I came to see the space one time, and most of the work was done with, the Dorsky team over FaceTime and Zoom, really trying to build this space. And I think this image actually captures really well the kind of diversity of mediums that are present, in the show. So we're looking at sculpture, we're looking at photography, video, audio, all sorts of, ways that artists are thinking, and really trying to make sure that those pieces again exist in dialogue with each other. So just pull up my notes here. I think there are a series of questions that the exhibition poses. Again, I'm an educator, so I'm not going to give you a whole bunch of statements on what I think it is. I'm going to ask questions that I think are present in the works themselves. What are we trying to change? What must be built and what must be knocked down to best advance our efforts? What wisdom can be borrowed from the past in charting new paths forward? And how do we manifest bold futures envisioned by people of color amid systemic imbalances and structural power? Yeah, gonna let those sit too. I think those are really big questions. I think some works, obviously speak more directly to this kind of structural power piece than others. I think some are intentionally quiet or reverent or self-reflective, whereas others are much more declarative in their kind of statement on, what more equitable futures look like. And I think that tension is actually really important. And I look forward to experiencing it in space. So these are like a couple of frames. I won't say that this is what was in my mind as the exhibition was coming together. This exhibition was a more fluid process than saying, these are 6 kind of posts I want to be sure to hit, and then we're going to find artists that fit, and then we're going to like lay it out in space. That's not how I work. I think, it was an ongoing conversation with Anna. It was going on these amazing studio visits, meeting artists, hearing even artists that I've known for years, right? Like Miguel, who's going to be here later, I've known for, 15 years. And just being surprised by what's coming up for people in this kind of social political moment around freedom, and how work that was once familiar to me is like completely altogether bringing new issues into conversation. And so in preparing this conversation today, I kind of saw these big 6 buckets. Now, I don't know if this is like a thing that I could have predicted, 6 months ago when we were kind of compiling the show, but I think they're important to name here. So, and these are in no particular order. We're going to start by looking at artists who are considering Black joy as a form of resistance, Black feminism, Black archives, and I'm foregrounding Black here, obviously, because this is about the Black radical imagination at its core, and then also considering, how other histories intersect and extend from this history. Intersectional identities, disrupting systems, and bridging history. So this is like clearly not all inclusive of the themes, but I think it helps to really locate some communities that are present in this exhibition in a central way. Yeah, and to really kind of cite freedom dreaming in a particular context. Okay, Black Joy. So this work by Derek Adams, I love it. It's just, can I like take moments to look at the work too while we go through? So this is from Derek's floater series. I don't know how many he's made to date, but they're all different varying sizes and dimensions. This is actually a really large work, not the largest in the show, but it's large. Yeah, and just thinking what it means to look at this group of, you assume they're friends, convened in a pool, lounging around a floater. I think those drinks have alcohol in them. And what it means to capture this moment of leisure, of enjoying each other's company, of fun. I think there's something playful in the actual floater itself that, just gives you this sense that it's like, the only thing people are worried about in this scene is each other and whatever it is that they're talking about. And I love that. I'm so used to seeing something like this where there's also some impending doom that's coming, from a side angle or something. But this moment in and of itself is just so pure and so joyous. And I was doing some research into, how Derek's been talking about this series. And I found this interesting quote. When we get together, it isn't to have a party. It isn't just to have a party. We might be planning a revolution at the same time. And so I really enjoyed kind of laying that thought over this particular work, right? Which is like, are y'all hanging out at the pool? Like, just having a good old time? Are you also, and within the context of joy, planning something bigger? And so I think this work really asks more questions than it answers in that regard. And I just love it. I really do. Jarrett Key, whose work is pretty near Derek in space in the exhibition by design, is also thinking about Black Joy. This is an image from their new cement painting series. And what I love about these works is that, despite being very clearly airy and uplifting, and, there's this kind of like natural landscape in the background. The person, that's kind of depicted in the foreground has a big old cheese on their face. Is that, the work itself is heavy, right? Like it's a cement painting. And there's something about that kind of disconnect between thinking about how cement and like concrete is normally depicted, right? In this kind of urban streetscape or these like street scenes, street photography, however it is that, people are depicted in our communities in these moments of leisure. This is like the total opposite, but it takes that material of, the urban landscape and totally subverts it. And, I just love it. I love that it's a diptych. I love that you can, kind of take it as one full picture, or you can look at these two kind of pieces to the scene independently. And just imagine other pieces added on, right? Like you could imagine this scene kind of extending to the right, and there being more people in this scene. And that it's about this moment of just pure connection with oneself, and that taking that kind of moment for joy for self is a form of care that is about liberation, right? It is about, kind of freeing ourselves from prescriptions around productivity and around what we should be doing with our time, and just really reveling in this moment. Again, if you have questions or you want to like jump in, please just go right on ahead. So it's interesting. I didn't realize that when I was thinking, so Kelly talks about feminism, specifically like Black feminism in his book, but I didn't realize that that's like a thing that was happening as I was looking specifically at animated works. And that kind of came after, and I was thinking like, how is it that animation has become this really interesting tool that's used to talk about these archives of like feminist thought? And so this first piece here on the right is by Chitavia Gary. It's called An Ecstatic Experience. It's a really beautiful film. I think there's places you can see it online if you can't, come to space and see it at the Dorsky. And I remember actually crying the first time I watched this video. And I say actually, like I cry all the time. I'll probably cry today, but it was like real tears. It wasn't just like, this is so beautiful. It was like the expression of pain around freedom, around a desire for freedom, is just like so palpable. It's partly the acting, but it's also all of the work that the artist is doing, manipulating this kind of raw footage and really trying to, you can see in that top image on the right, underscore certain kind of facial expressions and certain sentiments in a way that really directs your attention. And, you know, you're kind of like moved in and out of these like moments with individuals, these moments, these kind of collective moments of both joy, you know, thinking about what it means to emote in, you know, kind of like a choir in a setting like that. But also images of protest and what it means to find joy, you know, within each other and within that kind of safety and community of articulating outwardly, publicly, what it is that you need in order to feel free. And so this work is, I can't really describe like in words how it might make you feel about your own sense of freedom, but it really does, it just moves so many pieces together in a way that is really, really beautiful. And then I think, you know, quite literally on the left, you see this work that quotes Saidiya Hartman, who is actually, when I started thinking about freedom, like as a project that might be explored collectively, it was her book, Wayward Lives, Beautiful Experiments, that I was looking at, right? And I was thinking about like how all of these kind of snapshots of like people in their own individual lives might come together into this mosaic of ideas for how we actually know how to get free, how it lives within us, right? How it's something that we have access to because we're doing it every day, these small acts of resistance. And so this quote quotes Saidiya Hartman, who, you know, has been quoted to say, caring for ourselves partly is the way we destroy this world and make another. And I think in the context of, you know, what this exhibition is about, right? And looking at what we've been given, imagining alternative solutions, this work just felt like a really quiet but powerful contribution, you know, to some of those questions. Okay. So this is a screenshot from Phoebe Boswell's animation. It's a film, sorry. The Words I Do Not Have Yet. And another really beautiful, striking, you know, film that you, I think, can find online on her website. But if not, please try and check it out at the Dorsky, like on the big screen, because it's really, really beautiful. Yeah, and so just thinking about, again, like what it means to look at history, to look at individual history in the context of kind of collective struggle, and how using animation to really layer different voices atop each other produces a new tension, right? That gives, that's productive in certain ways. And so she's also looking at kind of, you know, archives of feminist thought. She's talking about Audre Lorde, and, you know, thinking about what it means to really kind of put that history into the context of, you know, this dialogue that she's creating among these animated characters. And I think this is something that we'll see a lot, right? Which is like, it's not just about, well, for a lot of artists, it's not just about, you know, kind of individual expressions. It's about how those sit in relationship to one's own understanding of community, and how community is often who you rely on when you're kind of exercising these tools of freedom that you're kind of, you know, practicing. Okay, my computer's doing something strange. Okay, so we have Black archives. I think, you know, this is really fun. So the Black School is an artist collective, Shani Peters and Joseph Coulier. You know, when I first met them, I knew them as artists, individual artists. They got together, they created the Black School. The Black School was kind of a concept of how we might think about, you know, education in relation to history, histories of movements and of protest. And all of a sudden, you know, now they're building an actual physical school in New Orleans. I say all of a sudden, not to flatten like the years and years of work that they've done to make this a reality, but yeah, to really chart a course, right? From an idea for how do we think about education pulled out of, you know, the systems of education, which have their own ways of kind of imposing on our civil liberties and our ability to dream, and putting them in this more radical space where, you know, education happens on the street, it happens inside community centers, it happens inside homes, it happens at the kitchen table where someone's getting their hair done. You know, it's something that does not rely on the structure of the academy or of, you know, education in whatever form it takes institutionally. Is something that actually belongs to us and belongs to community. And so what I was really excited about, you know, with this studio visit was them really being excited to present actual ideas and formation, right? So they're building a physical schoolhouse in New Orleans. The schoolhouse is taking shape kind of slowly over time, as has their vision for it, and inviting visitors to really play with these modules that are, like they're paper, right? So they can get torn, they can get wet, depending on like what you have in your hands, that becomes part of your handling of this really important history of like the Rosenwald schools, and really trying to, kind of couple that with some aspects of architectural kind of specificity to New Orleans to really just play with and layer these histories on your own terms. And so I love this. I love that, I have no idea what this might look like on a given day when you walk in, but that there's really no barrier to entry, right? Like I think it invites you to pick it up. I think there's a sense that the work wants you to engage it. And I think, for them, the questions that they're asking when thinking about freedom is, what types of space feel welcoming? What types of space feel comfortable? What types of space do you feel like you can grow in? So again, like having this kind of modular approach, meaning you could start with just one shipping container, or you could have 25, depending on your level of what you need to feel comfortable. And what types of space do you feel free in? I think, there's a young person I was talking with the other day who's talking about how he wanted to be an architecture major because he didn't feel comfortable going into his own high school. And it was because, of the God, what's the thing called? The metal detector at the entry when you get in, the fact that there's, actual kind of armed folks that are part of your experience of just going to get an education. And he said, if I could learn how to build this space differently, I would take all of that away. But architecture is never a thing that anyone told me I could have access to. It's not a career that I was told that I could do or thrive in. And I think something like this just hopefully kind of gestures towards the sense that, yeah, like we can actually begin to insert ourselves in new ways into systems that have, been designed to exclude us, like actually physically designed. And so I just really love this work here. Okay, and this is work by the Yappa Repository. And they're another interesting artist collective, right? So they're a resource library that's people, right? So it's an itinerant resource library. And yeah, it's about kind of like finding new ways to exhibit these artifacts that affirm and project people of color, African descent into the future. And so I think in this work, what they're really thinking about is like, when you look at the history of kind of how these types of objects might be presented in space, they're thinking about cabinets of curiosity and all the kind of problematic like colonial histories that museums extend from, no matter what museum you're talking about. And this becomes an actual kind of interactive living library that shifts and responds to people in space, right? So it's not about presenting history as static, it's about how can your physical engagement with space change an outcome or change a perspective or a way that we look at kind of historical information. And yeah, I think that, it's like these types of works that really call into question how looking back helps us to frame new ideas for what we might create in the future, right? So it's not rooting too heavily in history in the sense that like we're trying to recreate a thing that's been done, but it's saying, what can we learn from histories that have been, enacted, and how might we carry lessons from that forward without carrying the problems, like without carrying, the things that weigh us down, that kind of inhibit our imagination. How are we doing on time? Good, okay. All right, so intersectional identities. Again, like I think a lot of the work in the exhibition, it begins at this really kind of intimate personal level, but it extends to these larger comments on community. And I think what's so unique about this show is that so many of the artists in this exhibition represent, so many different communities, and, thinking about what it means to investigate that out loud and what it means to really be a person whose work is asking questions of others that you're also asking of yourself, right? So it's a form of accountability. It's a form of kind of radical thinking that I think enables people to be in conversation about the most private parts of themselves. And so this work by Golden, hold on. Sorry, is part of a self-portrait series, which is really, really beautiful. I would encourage you to go to their site and just see all the photos, because it's hard to just have picked two, right? I think that they really are in dialogue with themselves. And it's called On Learning How to Live. And yeah, this body of work is really about exploring what for them is kind of the intersection of Blackness, a family, of someone who really identifies, you know, through the lens of their family, and gender, and how all of those things are constructs, especially, you know, in this country. And so this work is kind of imagining, like, what would it mean if I could just go to the tennis court in my yellow dress and like not be bothered? Like, no one will come up to me and say, you know, why are you wearing this? Or like, what are you doing here? And so I think, you know, this kind of layered approach to the photograph, and the fact that the artist isn't actually at the court, right? It's there's this disconnect between wanting to be somewhere and being somewhere. Yeah, it's a really powerful statement on like how we free ourselves from the perceptions of others. Okay. So questions that Golden is asking, and this is, you know, directly pulled from their artist statement, so I'm not making this up. What people do I belong to? How will they remember me? If there is a headline for my death, will they name me as I am, or how the government perceives me to be? And so, yeah, I mean, again, I think this goes back to that tension, right, between like how we want to identify as people in the world and the power of projection, the power of others' perceptions in shaping, you know, our own kind of lived experience of freedom. And so this work by Jordan Nasser is, I wish that the photograph captured it as well. It just doesn't. None of the works are captured that well in photograph, sorry. But this work in particular, like if you could just go up and put your face as close as the guards would let you, talk about tension, like you can really actually feel it in this work. And so, yeah, these are hand embroidered, you know, what I've been calling dreamscapes, but, you know, in some ways they're kind of like landscapes superimposed on, you know, kind of abstract landscapes. Yeah, and so, you know, the artist is really thinking about color and form and texture and how that produces what I call tension, but what they call, you know, disjuncture. And, you know, for the artist, it's about kind of thinking about homeland from this location of diaspora, right? So imagining what it might be like, feel like to be in community, you know, with this community of women weavers in Palestine, making these works, but doing that, you know, from this location of New York City, right? And I don't know, I just think there's something really powerful about the dream component in that, right? Which is like, how do you know and understand a place that you don't actually inhabit with your body, right? It's through tradition, it's through community, it's through conversations that come out in community through tradition. You know, it's all of the kind of ways that art can bring people together to start a conversation. In this case, producing the actual work of art that's on the wall. And yeah, I think, you know, hold on. See, now you're gonna see my, oh, okay, hold on. That was my birthing playlist.
Some good songs.
We didn't ever get around to it. Thank you, thank you. It's like every time this earbud falls out, it just wants to play my music. So we're just gonna go with that. I don't know if Wanda joined us yet, but this work is awesome. And again, photograph does not do it any justice. It's not a knock on whoever took this photo. It's just like the detail in the work itself is another one you just have to get up close and personal. And yeah, what I love about this work is that, you know, so if you know the history of her kind of performance work, it takes on a different meaning, but you actually don't really need to know all of that to sense that there's some form of like destruction, but also evolution that's happening in the work, right? And so just looking at the way that, you know, this kind of artificial hair, this wig is interspersed with, you know, this foam and these jewels, it really gives you this sense of like something morphing into something else, and that it's like a little bit grotesque, but like in the most beautiful way possible. And so, you know, what was really fun about this studio visit was, you know, Wanda's someone that I've known for a long time, mostly for her performance work. And what it means for this work to actually be the embodiment of kind of retiring a public persona that people know, right? So it's like what it means to kind of shed this chuleta image and literally like pull this wig off and make work as the same person, but differently. And so thinking about what that means in terms of personal freedom, what that means in terms of, you know, kind of resisting the construction of art world identities, right? It's like you start as one thing, you get a formula, you get some form of success. And, you know, a lot of times people hold on to that because that's like what you have. But, you know, I think this is really brave work that she's presenting. I think it marks a shift that I'm really excited to see where it goes. And again, this is part of a series. So thinking about what it means to not just make a statement about like, I was this and now I'm this, or I was doing that and now I'm doing this. It's what it means to kind of do that work as a thought process out loud. Yeah, go see this work if you can. Okay, so this is probably one of the biggest works in the show. Again, you can't really tell from the photograph. This is by Yeshua Plus. And it's a collage that's made with kind of woodblock, carving on woodblock prints. And, you know, what I thought was really interesting about this work and how it relates to the show is, you know, he kind of recently used ancestry DNA to reveal this whole aspect of not just who he is, but who he is in relationship to a family, in relationship to the American dream. And I just love the idea, you know, I'm also someone that recently did ancestry DNA and is like confronting a whole bunch of different things that I had never thought about as a young person, right? Just because, you know, I kind of trusted the stories that I've been told about who I am and where I come from. And so just being really fascinated by how this artist kind of integrated this new knowledge into this body of work that's really kind of exploring these layers to identity using collage, right? Which is brilliant because it's like, that's what you're able to do with collage. You're able to kind of stack different layers of information to produce, you know, things that are legible, things that are illegible. And so this is probably the largest kind of section. We're almost at the end here. 5. So disrupting systems. I think this is really about, you know, if I were to kind of put it in a sentence, it's like, how do we liberate our imagination, you know, from these kind of traditional power structures, right? So thinking about language, thinking about, you know, just all the ways that we've been kind of coded to express ourselves and what it means to kind of break those things down into their component parts and start over, to kind of rewrite a message, you know, without relying necessarily on what's kind of been written before. And so I think Christy Neptune, she has 3 works in the show, but the video work is the one I feature here because I think it's probably the most, like if I were to have to pick one work in the exhibition that like very clearly articulates some strategies for like how to disrupt systems, it's this work. So this is called The Color Line. And this is the artist here on the right. And it's a performative happening that she kind of staged between what she terms the colonizers and the colonized. And, you know, there's all sorts of rules for engagement that, you know, I don't want to flatten by not having the time to describe here, but essentially, you know, what it asks is for the white folks participating in this activity to really defer to the expertise and the understanding of the Black folks in the activity. And to do that without question, right? It's like, you've shown up in this space, these are the rules of engagement, and what we're trying to do is kind of, you know, invert existing power dynamic, and you know, that's just why you're here. If you don't want to do that, then you can not be here. And yeah, I think that what it does is it makes enough space for those who may or may not have an active voice in some of the decision making, you know, around kind of how these systems of power actually enter into their lives, to be centered and to have, you know, the most kind of vocal opinion in the room about what might be built physically. And so again, another work that like demands more kind of engagement with it. If you can, it's also on her website. Okay, I'm going to speed up here. So this is definitely the largest work in the show. I don't know why I keep like not just saying that. Xavier's work is huge. It's this 3-panel, it's what she calls a text and color field painting. So these are 3 panels, and you know, the red panel on the left, text in the middle, blue panel on the right. And you know, she has a history of making these works with text, right, that are really kind of like poetic, that, you know, leave you probably with more questions than answers, just because of words that are omitted, phrases that kind of come forward that, you know, kind of have popular meaning. And so you're able to latch onto, and then interspersed with some that don't, right? And so, yeah, you know, again, playing with systems, playing with kind of language, but also legibility and illegibility, to think about narrative. So to think about, you know, that in the context of history is like, what can we fill in these spaces and these gaps that she's created for us that rewrite the narrative? And how does rewriting, you know, the narrative offer us a lens to understand, you know, the future differently? And so, yeah, thinking about this as a work that, you know, is a form of meditation, right? It's something that you could stand in front of and see something different every time that you read it. And that is also an important act of resistance, right? It's like finding time to make meaning, as opposed to just inheriting meaning as it's been kind of given to us. So this work by Jessie Chun is smaller than it looks. It's one of the most kind of like delicate feeling works in the show. The etched latex on the left is actually pinned into this box. So there's like a little tiny pin at the top, a little tiny pin at the bottom. And so it gives you that sense of kind of like experimentation, right? It gives you a sense that she's actually playing with these materials, you know, which have different kind of words and phrases written in, and folding them to create new meaning. So again, like playing with language, but also playing with perception, playing with, in terms of contemporary art, right? Like our comfortability leaning in and being close to a work, because you really do have to get close in order to see the detail here, similar to Jordan's work. And yeah, just loving what that means and how that kind of adds to the dialogue in, you know, relation to some of these kind of larger works that I think have much more kind of pronounced ways in, right? And so thinking that this is also a really important kind of point, counterpoint, like counterbalance of the show. Okay, so this is Zora J Murray's work. This is a photograph, but it's, you know, presented using kind of collage. And yeah, I think that, you know, he as an artist is really thinking about the power of images, and how images, as they circulate kind of popularly, help to create belief systems, right? Which I think in turn helps us to understand who we are as people in relation to, you know, larger kind of communities, but also to larger issues. And so, you know, this work, there's so much in it that maybe I'll leave actually for when we talk kind of in more dialogue, but, you know, thinking of what the watermelon means in the kind of iconography of Black history and Black culture and how it's been portrayed in the media, what this, you know, kind of cardboard on the ground means or might mean in relation to, you know, issues around housing security. And so, but thinking about how, you know, these two things played with, and then with this kind of visible lighting and like cord in the back, you know, reeks of like artifice, right? Like it's not a thing that you naturally happen on in the street. And so why is an artist compiling these elements together in this way, foregrounding this kind of blurry, like floral background? And so it makes you kind of ask questions about how these images exist, you know, in a more kind of like common way, and what the artist is doing by representing them and repositioning them in this way. So this is Cordelia J Henry. This work is like so awesome. Both works are awesome, but yeah, so these are two films, and both, you know, I think people kind of project like an Afrofuturist lens onto it because they're cited in the future. So I understand that. But I think, you know, what makes me so excited about this work is, again, that it's like, it's lyricism and it's kind of poetic nature, despite being a video. So, you know, you don't feel this remove of like high quality production. You feel like you're in this intimate situation with someone who is physically like engaging their body with the land and thinking about how performance can be this kind of, you know, personal act of resistance, and like how that can be depicted over time. And so Makara, which I don't actually have depicted here, so maybe I shouldn't talk about that one. Yeah, sorry. We got a little bit of a technological glitch here. Okay. So yeah, the final section that we're gonna talk about, bridging history. And again, I use history like loosely because I think of history as like a living concept, but I think just in the way that, you know, these next two artists or three artists are looking really to specific moments in time and how we might carry lessons from that time forward. I talk about it as bridging because it does feel like honoring and celebrating, you know, these historical kind of contributions of our communities, and, you know, kind of like treating that legacy as material to make new work that allows us to envision the future. And so this is Abigail Deville. Both of these works are part of her Libertas series that kind of borrow from this like classic liberation iconography to talk about how we consider and dream of freedom today. Oh, okay. Was that a question? No, okay. So the work on the left, Dark Matter, No Matter, you know, both of these are kind of in the tradition of assemblage. So when I talk about like repurposing materials, you can tell that, you know, like the artist didn't make this mannequin head, the artist didn't make this mannequin arm or this cart. These are objects that exist, that have their own kind of cultural meaning, that have been like found, reassembled with purpose, and kind of, you know, in considering how those, like the history of those objects sit in relationship to each other. And so, yeah, being really excited, you know, like how this work kind of critiques consumer capitalism and how we exist in relationship to, you know, ideas like the space race and, you know, I think like the shopping cart, and just thinking about all the ways in which it's all kind of wrapped up in this history that, you know, in some ways you can talk about in relation to, hello? Okay. I'm sharing a Bluetooth with my husband, so it said device disconnected, and I was like, I don't know, sorry. Yeah, and so, you know, I think what's funny is like everyone that sees this work talks about it as being phallic, which I didn't actually see until this angle and seeing it in relationship to this other work. But, you know, I just love that it's a dialogue on power. It's a dialogue on, you know, kind of auditing our relationship to some of these objects that, you know, are super familiar. Whereas, you know, I see this work on the right as being a little bit more meditative. That's just me. I don't know that the artist meant for that to be the case, but the one on the right is called "And the Migrants Kept Coming." And this angle doesn't show it so well, but it's really kind of like an abstracted liberty pole. You know, it has this kind of sense of like upward energy. And, you know, that it's comprised of these materials that kind of reference a displaced African diasporic experience.
Nico, while you're on that slide, I just was going to say, I had this student today who brought up, and I thought it was a brilliant sort of insight and comparison with Abigail's sculpture, the Gil ScottHeron, Whitey on the Moon.
Nice.
Song, because with the images of the space race and the idea of the Apollo moon landing and sort of all the inherent problematic things, like we're spending millions of dollars to go to the moon, and yet we can't figure out like food deserts or like how to like house and feed the people here in this country. And so
exactly,
I thought it was a really keen observation on their part.
Yeah, no, that is. You said the student is here?
I had a tour earlier this morning, and that was when they brought it up. Yeah,
I love that. I love that. I forget what I think it was Summer of Soul, but there's a documentary I was watching this summer where they're asking a bunch of, you know, Black people like, how excited are you by this moon landing? And they're like, are you kidding? Like, I mean, it's great, but like I also need for our country to be looking like inward to address all these issues that we have here on Earth. So yeah, I think, you know, all of that is kind of written in the work, but in such a way that it invites reflection, as you've said, and invites kind of drawing parallels to current events. So this is a video still from Chanupa Hanukah's New Myth, which is a brand new work that he made this summer, or last summer. And it's part of a science fiction series called Future Ancestral Technologies. So this is like regalia that the artist has created. And yeah, just thinking through kind of his belief that, science fiction has the power to shape collective thinking and help imagine the future on a global scale. And so, in this work, thinking about migration and, what it means both like historically, like if you were to look at migratory patterns of people, specifically indigenous people, it does kind of chart instances of colonial oppression. But if you think about it today, right, like as a strategy for surviving what is like a constant and ongoing oppression, Chanupa has said, and this is like not a quote, but it's like, we will out survive you, right? And it's like this relationship to the land, this relationship to knowing oneself, and yeah, to knowing how to like navigate in a really instinctual way, and how that like just is so powerful in relationship to all the ways in which we've been trying to, it takes migration and it like reclaims it, right? It's like, this is our strategy for moving where we need to be in right relationship with the land. It's not about you pushing us out of our home. It's about us reconnecting with our purpose and with a place that, has meaning. And so I don't know if Miguel is here yet, but this is his work, these 3 pieces. So there's the vest on the plinth over here, and then there's the bicycle and Palante, the neon work. And yeah, these are really investigating, kind of what he calls underrepresented narratives of resistance that highlight the role of Puerto Rican and Mexican migrants in the struggle for American civil rights. And so just thinking again about like voices that get left out of conversations, like when you start to kind of break things down into, different communities. And the bike in the front is called Puerto Rican Cotton Picker, 2011. And it's a Schwinn that he himself has restored in the tradition of these like New York City bike clubs, Puerto Rican bike clubs. And it's really beautiful. It's like super shiny. It's one in a lot of series. And, I think that in relationship to this vest in the back, which pays homage to Felicitas Mendez, whose family took the Orange County School District to court in 1947 to demand desegregated access to education. The vest is, it has her name here on the left kind of shoulder embroidered in there. And thinking about, these kind of works that feel more historical, right? Like they reference a specific moment in time and a specific history in relation to this neon work, Palante, which, translates as onward. And it's something that you might hear in protest chants. And yeah, just thinking about how those sit in relationship to each other and what it means to kind of carry this history onward, to carry it forward, and like what can be learned from that history. And I didn't have a picture of just the work. So this is Zachary's Sour Air, which is the kind of, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but it's the black, it's the black, I'll say flag for lack of a better word, that's hanging in the middle of this space. And, it's a bit of a wordplay because he's thinking it's like S-hour. And so, he's referencing Toni Morrison's Beloved with those words. And just thinking about, air, breath, what it means to really talk about like a legacy of slavery, and thinking about, death is the only way out of a form of oppression at a certain time, and how to kind of bridge that conversation with breath today, Black Lives Matter, I can't breathe. And, doing that in a way that's not like super linear, right? Like, I don't think anyone looks at this work and is like, oh yeah, clearly this is about that. But I think, the use of the word hour really kind of provokes and prompts a question around like, how do I see myself in relationship to this space, that's being shared. All right, we're almost there. Oh, we're there. Okay. So, some key takeaways here. And this is not all of them. Again, like I want to hear from you, but I think for me, what's really powerful about the role that artists play in this exhibition is that they help us to see the familiar and unfamiliar ways, right? So especially thinking about someone like Abigail, where it's like objects that you might have in your home, but recompiled in ways that pose different questions that, ask you to look at yourself differently and to ask, where do I situate myself in a relationship to the history of these objects, to the history of these objects for other people as well. Also thinking about artists as, liberating us, helping us to liberate ourselves from like the ways in which our lived experience can kind of like confine our imagination, right? And so if all we're able to imagine is what we've experienced, that's like a really limited way to move about the world. And so I think by, rendering legible what is illegible, giving color and shape and form to really complex ideas that are constantly evolving and in motion, right? Like daring to do that, knowing that it's only going to be seen as a snapshot in time, but that it's part of this kind of larger conversation. I think that's like really bold work that helps us to be bold in our thinking about, where we are and where we want to be. And then also thinking about artists and like the power of observation, right? So like the way that they can direct their attention to specific materials, to specific histories in a way that encourages us to kind of look at our own entrenched perspectives and biases and see things differently, right? And encourages us to like go out and look at the world differently. And so thinking about those kind of three takeaways as like a major kind of contribution of the artists in the show, but there's so many small things. And I think, Zach, you could probably speak to this like when we open it up, but the types of questions that, or even discomforts that it produces for people that then have to ask, well, why is this sitting in relationship to this? And what was the curator's intent or what was the artist's intent? And, what I would say is that I believe that myself and the artists in this show, really are just trying to open up that space for that conversation to happen out loud and to happen with other people. And so that is why I'm excited to open it up. I think that's all I have for today. It is. Questions for me, for each other, ideas.
Let's pull up
Oh,
this gallery view.
Should I stop sharing here?
Yeah, maybe. Then we can see everybody a little bit closer up.
There we go.
So if you have a question, feel free to unmute yourself. I see Maya. Maya asks, Maya, do you want to ask it or do you want me to ask it for you?
I can turn my camera quick. Hi, I'm in,
Hi.
the gallery right now.
Are you at the museum?
Hey, what's up, Maya?
I'm just emptied out. But I'm just curious to see like if you had learned anything about yourself or kind of evolved your identity since curating the show, since it really, I know it impacted me a lot in like viewing how I identify, especially to the public, but also internally.
Yeah, I think, well, so I'm like, I should disclaim, right? Like I'm like a constantly evolving person. So I feel like, every day I could answer this question. But I think it actually redirected my attention towards the smaller, quieter, independent acts of resistance, right? Like I think I'm so used to like working institutionally. And so thinking about change at a certain pace or at a certain scale. And I think just seeing, some of the more kind of like Golden's work, like Christie's work, like people that are really using their own body and, their own kind of questions of self in relationship to some of these issues in the world. I think those like struck me a different way than they have in the past, right? Because I think we're in this moment of like grand gestures and like, everyone thinking that a movement has to be comprised of like 100,000 people, but it's like, what would it mean for that movement to be like yourself with a past version and a future version of yourself, and like, how can that become contagious in a way that then produces community and that then produces collective movement, right? That it doesn't have to start from like a podium where people are like, I don't know what the word is, but yeah. So I think for me, that's what I learned was that I think because of how I've been trained and because of like my urgency and trying to like contribute to changing the world, I can think too quickly sometimes and I can think at a scale that's not actually sustainable, right? Like I think there is something to the repetitive nature of these kind of self-reflections and self-meditations that feel like over a lifetime, like that's such a contribution to helping people see the world differently. And so I think that's how I'll answer that question today. Ask me again tomorrow.
Thank you so much. And I feel like that's reflected perfectly in the show, especially coming from someone who constantly is overworking and just overanalyzing. I thought what I gained personally was like there is, I guess, like a form of resistance and also a form of growth and like just caring about myself and taking care of myself like as a marginalized individual. And I just thought, I thought that read perfectly in the space.
Awesome. Yes. Cool. Thank you.
Hi, Nico.
Hey.
Thank you for that. For taking us through the show. I'm in the Bronx, so I don't think I would be able to see the show. So I'm really grateful for this program. The title, when I read it, Somewhere in Advance of Nowhere, that nowhere kind of hit me over the head like caveman style. I was like, oh my goodness, like utopia. and then and then, you know, hearing you talk about you know, an approach to like social action that is similar to what Adrienne Marie Brown kind of describes as like the fractals. It made me think about utopia as, you know, the fact that utopia kind of translates to like a no place or a nowhere. People often use it as a grounds to be like, well, what's the use, you know, and like dreaming of a better future. And so I've started thinking recently about utopia being more so as kind of like, rather than like a destination or something that you have to get to, that it's live, right? It's a project, kind of like how you're describing your approach to freedom, that like you can live your utopia and like you can bring your utopia out into the world. Kind of, you know, I kind of think of like even the way that you approached exhibition making as kind of like enacting some type of utopia, honestly.
Thank you, Cheyenne.
Yeah.
Yeah, that resonates with me too. It's and the nowhere hit me too. Like I think Anna, we were, you know, volleying a title back and forth for a while, and I think landing there was really important, right? Because I think it is about, like you say, like these kind of like fractals and like contributions to a larger image and a larger whole. And I think, yeah, there's like, we're so trained to have like a certain type of output in mind when we're doing anything, even dreaming being the activity, right? And so I think inviting in this idea that like, this does not have to produce a specific outcome or a certain destination or a certain sense of arrival, right? It can be just a recognition that you've been in your utopia all along, right? And I think that's just really important. And I think that, yeah, again, like that for me as someone who, this is like one of the first exhibitions that I've curated like in a space like this. And yeah, it was like, I don't want to make any definitive statements about like what a utopia looks like, because I don't know. Like, it's not a thing that I have access to. And it's also not my place, right? Like to make that assertion for other people. But yeah, it really has been like such a joyously fluid process of learning from artists at all stages, right? Yeah, I should say Cheyenne and I are like homies. We used to build spaces together at the Studio Museum on the same team. So I really appreciate your insights. Thank you.
If I can just, it makes me think, I've been thinking about utopia, so I appreciate Cheyenne your observations too, because an exhibition that preceded this at the museum was the exhibition about Kate Millett's art colony for women, which was basically a utopic queer women utopic project here in the Hudson Valley. And kind of one of the things I was thinking about with that show is that, you know, with utopias you never get there, but kind of connected to what your quote, Nico, the Kelly quote at the beginning that you started with, how people may judge, you know, freedom dreams success or visions of freedom as being unsuccessful because they didn't change the structures that they were addressing, you know, but that there's still value in those visions. Yeah, like, yes, change takes a long, long time, but the gift of artists is spending time with those visions, and there is still value there, even if, you know, 20, 30, 50 years later, you know, not that much change has happened. And I see that in the Millett show. I see that value of spending time with those visions absolutely in this show. And I think, Nico, we talk briefly about this, how when you chose that title, Somewhere in Advance of Nowhere, which is a quote from Jane Cortez's writing, right? And how Jane Cortez is an artist who's going to be in our next exhibition in the fall about Benjamin Wigfall and his kind of utopic artist project, the workshop that he set up in Kingston, teaching printmaking and life skills to teenagers in Kingston, and how, you know, from our perspective as an institution or as a group of people working in this museum, how there's this thread between the shows and what, you know, is more of a curiosity and more of a, I'm just, you know, going to spend some time thinking about what we as a museum, as a community of people, our visitors, our students, our workers, our board, what are we learning from these artists in this series of exhibitions? You know, what does it mean for us to spend time, you know, learning from those artists and from those histories? So thank you for kind of being part of our journey and our learning and really kind of bringing together some of these threads.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you.
I love in the Kelly book, a couple of things that sort of what you were previously talking about that brought to mind when he says that freedom and love, what is it? Freedom and love constitute the foundation for spirituality, another elusive and intangible force with which few scholars of social movements have come to terms. That idea that we like forget that that love, freedom, that care, like in the Chitavia Gary piece, like that care is like the radical foundation for the dreams, which are a vision. And that, I'm going to read another quote from Kelly. It's so good. Surrealism, I contend, offers a vision of freedom far deeper and more expansive than any of the movements discussed thus far. It is a movement that invites dreaming, urges us to improvise and invent, and recognizes the imagination as our most powerful weapon. That is awesome. The idea of imagination as a weapon. I mean, I don't know, that wasn't a question so much as just like all of these sort of things that come together. And then also with that side of convergence that Jane Cortez talks about between the reality and the dream, and how that's about like part of that work is like contending with yourself. One of the things that I think about almost weekly is this essay by Adrian Piper that came out like the year I was born. It was published in '81, called Ideology, Confrontation, and Political Self-Awareness. If you've not read it, y'all, it's like one of the best, I think, writings about just how to see oneself in the world. And she says, we started out with beliefs about the world and our place in it that we didn't ask for and didn't question. And so I was thinking about that also when you were talking about the DNA tests and like the ancestral information, how what we're given, you know, is this sort of, and especially marginalized people, they're given this sort of hijacked imagination. You know, they're given this sort of like baseline of like, this is the description of who you are, right? And you have to contend with that. There is a question there, and actually something I'd written.
No, it doesn't have to be a question.
You, which is like, I'm curious, like, is there a space that you found that you find that convergence happening most often, or like an artwork, or is it in being a mother? Is it in writing a book? Is there a place that you find yourself in that converging space of dreams and reality that like, that you could share or maybe reflect on?
Yeah, totally. I mean, so I should start by saying like, I feel like a weird alternative universe version of myself because I haven't actually been in physical space with art that much since COVID, right? Like I went to see something at Art Space two weeks ago and I was like, thank God, like I forgot how much I need the actual like physical proximity to art to feel like alive. I didn't forget, I just forgot that I could like insist on it. But, you know, so there's a work a work that was in the lobby of what is the old Studio Museum in Harlem by Glenn Ligon. It's called Give Us a Poem. And you've probably seen it. You know, it's this kind of like me-we alternating neon lights. And it's like, it's more like this actually. You know, and it's like the me and the we. And that work, you know, it's really simple, right? Like it's like words that mean something to you or they don't. But I think as someone who's always been navigating my relationship to institutions, but also institutions' relationship to communities, and often as like the kind of go-between in that space in between, there's just something so powerful about that work and how that kind of sits in relationship to this conversation around freedom dreaming, which is like, you know, dreaming is an activity of the mind, right? So in a certain regard, it is this kind of like individualized, intimate, personal kind of act that happens like in your body that people only have access to if you share it, right? But the hope is that you're doing that in community and with a sense of like a value system that brings you into conversation with others. And so I think there's something so powerful in that work to me, because it's a constant reminder that like neither exists without the other, right? Like communities don't exist without individuals, individuals don't exist without communities. And to have that work located inside an institution, like as a means of welcoming people into a mission and into a practice, you know, I think has always been really powerful to me, right? And I think that it was like something when I wanted my first tattoo, I was like, it has to be me, we, because, you know, it's like this kind of constant tension, but also like play space between who we are, you know, in our own imagination and who we are in relationship to the world around us. And so, you know, I cite that work kind of hesitantly because I haven't been in front of it for a while, but I think that its message, I think, fits really, you know, kind of like perfectly in this conversation that we're having. And then I think it's interesting that you bring up like motherhood, because I think, you know, for me, I'm realizing the ways in which like when you're physically just so tired, and maybe this will go away in a couple months or years is what people promise, but when you're physically so tired that like you don't self-filter, right? It's like whatever's happening in your head just comes out. And that's something I've never experienced in my life, right? Like I think that I'm very used to filtering and self-censoring and, you know, code switching and all the ways that I've had to kind of like survive inhabiting all these different institutional spaces. But yeah, this beautiful thing has happened now that I'm a mother, which is like, I just don't give a shit. Like I can't give a shit. Like I just, you know, I'm awake and then I'm not awake. And so when I'm awake, I'm trying to perceive everything like with as much attention and like engagement in the moment as I can. And that's definitely new for me. It feels like art. It feels like learning to see in a different way because, you know, I'm so used to like waking up and having a script for how I might spend my time and who I might, you know, kind of like direct my energies towards. And now it's a whole different paradigm and it's beautiful. And I would have never been able to guess it because I didn't experience it, right? And so it's that thing about like, yeah, can you only dream based on what you know? Or can dreaming be something more rooted in a trust in kind of instinctual responses to, yeah, to the world around you, and like hoping that that's a thing that everyone has the privilege to access. I think that's the other thing that like I have not said, which I should say, which is like not everybody has like access to dreaming or like the right to dream. Like it's a luxury, it's a privilege. It's like not a right that everybody has. And so I think that's the other important piece to this exhibition, right? Which is like, yeah, it centers these visions, these powerful visions, these like ideas for process. And it centers that in kind of like, you know, a POC led perspective. And that's like really, really important because if we look at who over time has been told not to dream or has had their visions de-radicalized, you know, that's who we're talking about. And so, yeah, it doesn't go without saying, so I should have said that at the beginning, but yeah, I don't know if that answers the question.
Beautifully. John Mark, do you want me to read this for you? Do you want to unmute yourself if you're able? I'll read it for you.
Yeah.
John Mark says, yes, please. Okay. Thank you so much for this wonderfully curated show. It feels like there is an ongoing game of catch up that galleries and museums are playing in order to acknowledge the contribution of artists of color have been making for a long, long time. He talks about, he references Simone Yvette Lee, Faith Ringgold being good examples. At the same time, there's such an intense backlash or blacklash from an anti-intellectual, anti-history, deeply political movement rooted in white supremacy. Can you say something about where you think this is going?
this being,
I think maybe the backlash and the catch up that museums and galleries are playing in acknowledging the contribution.
yeah,
So maybe I'm guessing the question is sort of like the friction between like the game that museums and galleries may be playing versus like that like anti-intellectual, anti-history progress versus pushback is what he says.
yeah. That's a huge question, Jean-Marc. I'm gonna try my best. Yeah, so I think, if like the last couple of years have revealed anything, it's like revealed, like you said, like who's been doing the work and who's playing catch up, or who, is like interested in the conversation, but is not willing to marshal resources towards actually participating in the conversation in a way that can be seen and felt. And so I'm of the mind that, there needs to be change happening from all parts of the system at once, right? And there's some people that are able to do that as leaders of institutions. There's some people that are able to do that as, workers within those institutions. It all depends on kind of what your location is. But, I think where I am really constantly aware of my position, right? Because I'm an independent. So, I'm kind of invited into these situations where, as someone who comes with my own value system, I'm then being asked to align them with institutions that are either playing catch up or that have been doing the work all along, right? Or some space in between. And I think I used to have like a much more, I used to have a line in the sand around that. Like I used to only want to work with people that, I share a very clear value system with. And I think more and more, and maybe this goes back to what you were saying, Cheyenne, about the work of Adrienne Maree Brown and thinking about change and how it happens and who's involved, and that no piece is too small for this larger mosaic of like what needs to happen. And so, yeah, I think, I'm learning to see my work as someone that's kind of mediating between a lot of different spaces that are having the conversation differently and at different levels of readiness and capacity, right? And so I think the backlash I think it will continue until, it isn't like one show during Black History Month that features Black artists, right? It's having, artists on the board, having people reflected in the institution at all levels of leadership, right? And I'm not talking about the Dorsky, I'm talking about, institutions at large and how we can talk about, where that change needs to happen for it to actually be part of a systemic kind of movement. So I don't know, I think it's, I'm thinking about like the debate around deaccessioning and like making resources available to collect Black art, and thinking about how that's not actually really like enough, right? Like that's like a piece maybe to the puzzle, but that doesn't rewrite the history. That just kind of, adds more pieces to the board. So it's a big question. I'm not the one necessarily to answer it outside of my experience, which is I really enjoy the kind of productive tension of working with all types of people at all stages of readiness for the conversation. And yeah, that's like probably why I'm tired today, because it's exhausting work. And, it's like, yeah, it's not sexy at all, but it has to be done. And that's my position.
I don't think any museum can claim, at least most museums can't claim to be above needing to do a lot of work still.
Yeah.
There was something, and I don't want to misquote you, but I heard once in an interview you said something, or maybe it was an article I read where you were like, what's nice about being an independent curator is that you like, or maybe it was about your book, you were talking about like how you care that you want museums to be something, but you're not dependent on them changing, or
yeah.
do you, I can't remember, you were like, oh, God, I wish I could bring enough information out of my brain to remind you of what you had said. But it was really, I thought it was quite funny. You were like, it was something along the lines of like, well, I can do this work, but I don't have to be in the system itself. Like I'm not relying on it. I just, I'm going to do the work, but.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, because if you think about like how pressure works, right? It's like, I'm collaborating with the people that are inside the institution. And so they're pushing from their location. and then I'm pushing from over here. And if you just think about, you know, like how that pressure looks over time, then yeah, something might shift or move. And I think that's kind of like my point, right? Which is, I don't have to be the one steering the ship. I could just be, you know, in my own way, playing my role, hoping that we're steering towards a form of change that's like, you know, able to be seen and felt. But yeah, it's funny. Someone had told me once, you know, because they were kind of looking at my career, right? Because I've been in institutions, I've also been outside of institutions. And you know, I go back and forth between like which I value the most at any given moment in time. But they were saying that, you know, they saw an urgency with the independent work, right? So it's like, I can work on these projects over a short period of time with museums, with, you know, artists, and work really, really like urgently so that we can try and produce change like in a specific, like understandable, digestible amount of time. But then on the other instance, it's like knowing that institutions change at this like ridiculously slow pace, right? That's just what it means to be an institution. But that because it's an institution, the size and scale of that change is massive, right? And so if you're able to make a change like that, you know, it's not just because it might not happen in my lifetime doesn't mean it's not like an important contribution, right? And so it's like, how do you balance urgency and like needing to address issues that are hurting people as they're hurting people with this desire for long-term systemic change, you know, that supports all of this work, right? So it's like, I don't know, I'd kind of see it as like moving like that, using my hands today. So yeah, you know, it's all important. And I'm just happy to be a part of it, you know, when and where I can.
That's awesome. Does anybody else have questions? We're right about 3:30. If you do, you could unmute yourselves, or otherwise. All right. Well, Nico, thank you so much.
Thank you.
This show has been incredible, and I will tell you that those small moments that you were talking about earlier, where you find your freedom, I've had so many of them with the classes from SUNY New Paltz, and the students are just so they really feel this. And a lot of them, you know, like I didn't grow up going to museums, and this is a really early experience in their lives. And that they see this type of work, that they see themselves reflected, and they see their struggles and also their dreams reflected, is that's really, really meaningful and potent. And so thank you for bringing us this show. And I can't wait to see you on Sunday. I hope that you'll all join us 3 to 5 here to see the exhibition in person. Have a drink and celebrate Nico and the artist.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts, Nico?
Yes. I know a handful of artists are coming. And so, you know, like take what I say with a grain of salt, like talk to them because they're amazing and they'll be coming from their various kind of locations on Sunday to hang out. So yeah, hopefully I'll see you in a couple of days.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great evening and a great weekend. And I hope to see you here. And everybody be well and keep dreaming.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming.
Bye, Nico.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you.
You're in the studio, John Mark.